This tutorial will be an overview of the concept of clauses in Latin. The Latin word clausum, from which we get the word clause, means closed. And that's an important thing to keep in mind about how a clause works in Latin, or in any language for that matter. Let's take a look at an example. Marcus, postquam villam intravit, amicum salutavit. It means Marcus, comma, after he entered the house, comma, greeted his friend. The main sentence here is Marcus greeted his friend. The clause here, introduced by the word postquam, tells us further background, in this case the timeline, of when Marcus did the main action of the sentence. After he entered the house is when Marcus greeted the friend. I find it helpful to take parentheses around the clause to remind yourself that a clause essentially is like an aside. It's telling you more information, but it's not the main sentence. Now, in Latin, clauses can actually happen anywhere in the sentence. The one we just looked at is actually the most common word order that Latin prefers. Latin, for some reason, is terribly fond of introducing the main sentence with the subject, and then immediately after the first word, putting in the clause. After the clause, we finish the main sentence. However, you can put the clause anywhere. Again, I'm going to put parentheses around the clause each time. Now we could translate this: after he entered the house, comma, Marcus greeted his friend. And so you see, the meaning is exactly the same regardless of where this clause goes. Here's another possibility. Marcus amicum salutavit, comma, postquam villam intravit. We have the main sentence first. Marcus greeted his friend. When did he do it? After he entered the house. Other words can introduce clauses. Postquam meant after. Antequam means before. Publius, comma, antequam urbem discessit, comma, uxori basium dedit. Publius, before he left the city, gave his wife a kiss. And again, Publius gave his wife a kiss is the main sentence. The clause just tells us the timeline. Caesar, quamquam fessus erat, ad castrum contendit. The main sentence is what is outside of the clause. Caesar hurried to the camp. What was the circumstances in which he hurried to the camp? Although he was tired. Latin also has what are called relative clauses. Now there's another tutorial that goes into great depth on relative clauses and relative pronouns, but the concept is essentially the same. The main sentence is what is outside the clause. Claudia librum legit. Claudia is reading a book. But the clause tells us more about, in this case, more about Claudia. The relative pronoun describes Claudia. Claudia, who is sitting in the garden, quae in horto sedet. Now, don't be afraid of what you are seeing on the slide. I am going to go into depth explaining how this works. But the last point to take away is that Latin loves clauses. Latin loves to pack clauses into a sentence. This sentence is going to show you just how bad it can get. I'm going to show you that the main sentence here means Marcus left the house. Marcus is your subject. Your verb is last. And the object, of course, is in the accusative case. Marcus left the house. But Latin throws in a clause. It's going to tell us exactly what house. Which house? The house which he had previously entered. This clause, quam antea intraverat, is a clause that serves to describe more about the whilom. Now, when did Marcus leave the house which he had previously entered? After he greeted his friend. This clause, postquam amicum salutavit, tells us the time frame in which Marcus left the house, by the way, which he had previously entered. And now finally, what about this friend, Marcus, after he greeted the friend who was sitting in the garden? And so what do we have here? We have a main sentence. Marcus left the house. And then we have a bunch of clauses that tell us more about, for instance, when did he leave the house? After he greeted the friend. More about the friend who was sitting in the garden. More about the house that he left, the house which he had previously entered. How are you going to process a sentence like this? You're going to do it by paying close attention to your subject, your main verb, and your object. And remember that Latin might throw in all kinds of clauses to tell you more about that main sentence.